The windmill creaked its lonely sermon across the desert, each rotation marking time Marcus Hale no longer counted. 2 years since he'd stripped the cavalry insignia from his uniform. 2 years since Colonel Morrison's face had twisted with rage. "You'll fire on those Apache families, Sergeant, or face court-martial." He hadn't fired. Now his Winchester gathered dust above the mantel, while his mother's Bible held down unopened letters from his sister back east. The Chiricahua Mountains rose like tombstones against the morning sky, and Marcus worked the pump handle, drawing water from depths that knew nothing of human wars. Coffee bitter as memory. Fence posts that needed checking. A saber mounted uselessly above his door. These were his companions now. In the failing light, he studied the treaty map spread across his table. His ranch sat precisely on the disputed boundary, neither Mexican nor American nor Apache. Perhaps that's why he'd chosen it. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The ancient cottonwood stood like a monument to survival, its gnarled roots diving deep beneath the alkali soil. Marcus had ridden out to check the eastern boundary, where spring rains had weakened the fence posts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert floor, and he'd nearly missed her would have, if not for the ravens. 3 of them circled low, their cries sharp against the silence. Marcus reined in his mare, hand instinctively moving to the colt at his hip. There, propped against the cottonwood's massive trunk, sat a figure that made him freeze in his saddle. She held a broken lance across her lap, its point snapped off halfway down the shaft. Her other hand pressed against her ribs where blood had soaked through the doeskin war shirt, a man's shirt, Marcus noted. Not the long dress Apache women typically wore. The beaded knife sheath at her belt caught the dying light, and Mexican silver conchos gleamed dully along her wide leather belt. Marcus's empty canteen bumped against his thigh as he dismounted slowly, deliberately. The woman's eyes tracked his movement, dark, unwavering, holding neither plea nor threat, just watching, calculating. When he took a step forward, she lifted the broken lance slightly. Not aggressive, but clear she would fight if needed. "Water," Marcus said in English, then caught himself. He searched his memory for the Apache words from army days. Found 1, 2. He pointed to his well, visible in the distance. Then to her. Then made a drinking motion. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying him. This close. Her height struck him. She had to be nearly 6 feet tall, with the broad shoulders of someone who'd grown up drawing a bow. The bullet graze across her ribs was ugly but not fatal. It was the gray pallor of her skin, the cracked lips that told the real danger. Dehydration would kill her faster than any wound. She spoke then, a stream of Apache words he couldn't follow, but her tone wasn't hostile. When he shook his head to show he didn't understand, she fell silent, then slowly, deliberately, looked at his rolled-up sleeve where his cavalry tattoo showed the crossed sabers and regiment number he'd never bothered to have removed. Marcus tensed, waiting for her reaction. Apache warriors knew those symbols, had learned to read them like death notices, but she simply extended her open palm, not begging, but showing she held no weapon in that hand. "Your horse?" Marcus asked, reverting to gestures. He mimed riding. She pointed back along a game trail, shook her head, made a falling motion with her hand. Marcus could see it in his mind's eye, the wounded horse finally giving out, probably a mile back. He'd spotted the sacred paint that Apache warriors used, red and white symbols that meant this woman wasn't just any tribal member. The sun dropped lower, painting the mountains crimson. They couldn't stay here. Marcus made a decision that would have gotten him shot 2 years ago. He pointed to himself, then to her, then to his ranch. Slowly, he unbuckled his gun belt and laid it on the ground, a show of faith. The woman watched this gesture with something that might have been surprise. For a long moment, they stayed frozen in tableau, the ex-cavalry sergeant and the Apache warrior, separated by 3 feet of desert ground and a century of blood. Then she drove the broken lance into the earth and used it to push herself to standing. Even wounded, she moved with a warrior's economy, no wasted motion. The yucca fiber rope around her waist had been cut, probably held provisions once, now gone. Her height was even more impressive standing. She looked him directly in the eye, something that would have unsettled most men. Marcus backed toward his horse, hands visible, and pulled down his water bag. He took a drink first, showing it was safe, then offered it to her. She accepted it with both hands, drank deeply but not greedily, maintaining her dignity even in desperate thirst. "My ranch," Marcus said, pointing. "Doctor, no, but—" He mimed bandaging, cleaning wounds. She studied the distant building, its windmill turning lazily in the evening breeze. Then she looked back at him, this white man with soldier's markings, who offered water instead of bullets. Whatever she saw in his face seemed to satisfy her. She nodded once, regally, as if granting him permission to help her. Marcus retrieved his gun belt but didn't put it on, instead hanging it from his saddle horn. He offered her his arm for support. She ignored it, taking 3 steps on her own before her legs buckled slightly. Only then did she accept his help, her hand on his shoulder, grip strong despite her weakness. As they moved toward his horse, Marcus noticed other details, the pattern of her beadwork that marked her as someone important, the scarification on her arms that spoke of Sundance ceremonies, the way she kept her free hand near the knife even while accepting help. This was no ordinary woman. This was a warrior, possibly a war leader, and she was trusting him with her life. The mare shied slightly at the unfamiliar scent, but Marcus steadied her with practiced ease. He helped the Apache woman mount, noting how she gritted her teeth against showing pain. As he led the horse toward his ranch, the last of the day's light fading, Marcus wondered what he'd just set in motion. Behind them, the broken lance stood upright in the desert floor like a grave marker or a signal. Marcus didn't look back to see which it might be. The coal oil lamp cast dancing shadows across the adobe walls as Marcus worked. The Apache woman sat perfectly still while he cleaned the bullet graze, her face revealing nothing even when the carbolic acid must have burned like fire. He'd offered her laudanum from his medical kit remnants from his army days, but she'd refused with a slight shake of her head. "This needs stitching," he said, knowing she couldn't understand the words but hoping the tone conveyed meaning. He showed her the curved needle and silk thread. She examined them with interest, then nodded her consent. As he worked, she studied his cabin's sparse interior, the Bible on the shelf, the unused Winchester, the daguerreotype of a woman in Eastern dress he kept on the mantel. When he finished the last stitch, she touched the photograph and raised an eyebrow in question. "My mother," Marcus said simply. "Dead now. Tuberculosis. 5 winters past." Whether she understood the words or just the sadness in his voice, she placed her hand briefly over her heart in what seemed like acknowledgement of grief shared. Then she pointed to herself and spoke a single word, "Naju." "Naju," Marcus repeated, and she corrected his pronunciation with patience until he got it right. Later, much later, he would learn it meant tall willow in her language. He offered her jerky from his stores and cornbread he'd baked that morning. She ate slowly, with dignity, even though hunger must have gnawed at her. When she dipped the cornbread in water to soften it, Marcus realized her throat was probably raw from thirst. He kept the water bucket close, let her drink whenever she wished. They sat in companionable silence as the night deepened. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert, and the windmill creaked its endless rotation. Marcus had made a pallet of blankets near the stove. He'd sleep in the barn, give her privacy and space. But when he moved to leave, she spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing for him to stay. He understood. Trust only extended so far. She needed to know where he was, needed to be able to watch him. So Marcus rolled out his bedroll by the door, his back to her, giving her the respect of privacy while staying where she could see him. It was an old negotiation, one he'd seen played out in army camps when Apache scouts first joined the cavalry. Sleep came fitfully. Every time Marcus dozed, he'd wake to find her watching him, those dark eyes alert despite her exhaustion. Around midnight, she finally closed her eyes, though her hand never left the knife at her belt. Marcus stayed awake then, keeping watch. listening to the night sounds of the desert. Something woke him just before dawn, not a sound, but the absence of sound. The coyotes had gone silent. The night birds had stopped calling. Even the wind had stilled. Marcus opened his eyes to find the pallet empty, the blankets folded neatly. On his porch, catching the first gray light of pre-dawn, lay a single eagle feather. He picked it up carefully, knowing the significance. Eagle feathers were sacred to the Apache, given only to warriors who had counted coup or shown great bravery. This was either a thank you or a promise, perhaps both. Marcus tucked it into his shirt pocket and set about making coffee, trying to ignore the unease prickling at the back of his neck. The sun broke the horizon as he stepped onto the porch with his steaming tin cup, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. They were everywhere. The ridgelines that surrounded his ranch were lined with mounted warriors, their silhouettes dark against the lightning sky. His soldier's eye automatically counted, calculated at least 300, possibly more. They sat their horses in perfect stillness. Navajo blanket saddles, bright splashes of color. Springfield carbines held across their laps. Some wore turkey vulture feathers in their hair. Others carried war shields painted with lightning symbols, medicine wheels, and symbols Marcus couldn't read. But no war paint. That detail penetrated his shock. These warriors weren't painted for battle. This was something else. Judgment. Perhaps. Or witness. The cup trembled in Marcus's hand, but didn't fall. His cavalry training kicked in, analyzing positions, noting escape routes that didn't exist. They'd positioned themselves perfectly high ground all around, overlapping fields of fire, no blind spots. If they wanted his ranch destroyed, it would take them perhaps 10 minutes. If they wanted him dead, he already was. Ravens circled overhead, their cries the only sound in the breathless morning. Even the ever-present wind had died, as if nature itself waited to see what would unfold. Marcus's mare nickered nervously from the corral, sensing the presence of so many horses, so many hunters. Movement caught his eye, a single rider descending from the eastern ridge. As the figure drew closer, Marcus recognized the bearing, the height, even before he could see clearly. Najou. But transformed. Gone was the wounded warrior in a torn war shirt. She rode a painted pony, sitting tall despite what must have been considerable pain from her wounds. She wore ceremonial dress, white doeskin decorated with elaborate beadwork, silver conchos that caught the morning light, and most remarkably, an eagle feather headdress that marked her as a chief's daughter or perhaps a war leader in her own right. The broken lance from yesterday had been replaced with one whole and decorated with scalps, but not human scalps. Marcus noted with relief. Horsehair, taken in raids, symbols of courage rather than death. She stopped her pony 50 yards from his porch and called out in Apache, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. Her words rang with authority, and she gestured toward Marcus. Then to the eagle feather he'd unconsciously pulled from his pocket. The warriors on the ridges shifted slightly, not threatening, but attentive. Whatever she was saying, it mattered. Marcus understood none of the words, but he recognized the cadence of testimony, of someone bearing witness. She was telling them about the previous night, the water, the tending of wounds, the respect offered. She held up her bandaged side, white cloth stark against her ceremonial dress, evidence of his aid. When she finished speaking, silence descended again. The judgment of 300 warriors hung in the balance. Marcus stood very still, cup still in his hand, meeting their gaze without challenge or fear. If this was to be his end, at least he'd chosen it. He'd offered water to someone who needed it, had tended wounds rather than causing them. After all the Apache blood on his hands from his army days, perhaps this was fitting justice. Najou raised her lance high, then turned her pony and rode back up the ridge, taking her place among the warriors. They sat there as the sun climbed higher, watching, waiting. For what? Marcus couldn't say. But he sensed this was far from over. The coffee grew cold in his cup as Marcus stood on his porch. One man facing an army, carrying nothing but the weight of a single act of kindness and an eagle feather that suddenly felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. Whatever came next, His life had irrevocably changed. The bridge between worlds had begun to form, though he didn't yet know he was destined to become it. The sun climbed higher, painting long shadows across the desert floor. Marcus remained on his porch, watching the warriors on the ridges, when movement stirred from the northern slope. 6 riders began their descent, 5 warriors flanking a central figure whose bearing commanded immediate attention even at distance. As they approached, Marcus noticed details his soldier's eye automatically catalogued. The lead rider sat his horse with the straight-backed authority of command, silver threading through black hair that hung loose past his shoulders. His face showed the deep lines of someone who had seen many winters and too much bloodshed. The warriors with him were younger but moved with the fluid grace of seasoned fighters, hands never far from weapons though making no threatening gestures. They stopped 30 feet from the porch. The chief, for that's what he clearly was, studied Marcus with eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes lingered on the eagle feather still in Marcus's hand, traveled to the cavalry tattoo visible on his forearm, then up to meet Marcus's gaze directly. The assessment felt like being read like a map, every scar and tell catalogued and weighed. Naju descended from the ridge, riding slowly, carefully. When she reached the group, she dismounted with visible effort. The wounds still pained her despite her proud bearing. She spoke quietly to the chief in Apache, and Marcus caught the tone, if not the words, respectful but familiar. The chief's eyes softened slightly when he looked at her, and Marcus understood. Father and daughter. The chief dismounted, his warriors following suit but maintaining their positions. He walked forward slowly, and Marcus descended from the porch to meet him halfway. They stood in the space between worlds, the Apache chief in traditional dress decorated with silver and turquoise, the former cavalry sergeant in worn canvas pants and cotton shirt. Naju moved between them, and what followed was perhaps the strangest conversation Marcus had ever participated in. She would speak in Apache, then kneel and draw in the alkali dust with a stick. Simple pictures, stick figures, wavy lines for water, circles for the sun's passage marking time. The story emerged slowly. 5 suns ago, 5 days, a group of riders had ambushed an Apache hunting party. Naju drew 8 figures with wide-brimmed hats, made slashing motions across her throat. Scalp hunters. She drew more figures lying still, the hunting party dead, including 2 who were barely more than boys. She alone had escaped, wounded, pursued until her horse died beneath her. Marcus knelt and took the stick. His own drawings were clumsy but clear enough. He drew a soldier hat, uniform, rifle. Then he drew many soldiers, many Apache, lines between them indicating battle. He touched his chest, pointed to the soldier drawings. Yes, he had been one of them. Then he drew the soldier walking away, placing the rifle on the ground. He made a slashing gesture across the air. "No more," he said in English. Then tried one of his few Apache words, "do, no." The chief studied these drawings for a long moment, then spoke to his daughter. She drew again the ranch, Marcus, herself, the water being offered. She carefully illustrated how he'd cleaned her wounds, the stitches, the respect given. She stood and demonstrated how Marcus had turned his back to sleep, trusting her with weapons while she was wounded. In Apache culture, this was either foolishness or profound honor. Given that Marcus was still alive, the chief seemed to lean toward the latter interpretation. "Two," Marcus said suddenly, remembering the Apache word for water. He gestured toward his well, then to all of them, making a drinking motion. It was an old ritual, one he'd seen during army negotiations. Sharing water in the desert was sacred. It meant acknowledging the other as human, as deserving of life. The chief's eyes sharpened with interest. Marcus went to the well, drew up the bucket, and carefully filled 6 tin cups he'd hammered from old coffee cans. He carried them on a plank of wood, offering the first to the chief with both hands, a gesture of respect he'd learned from watching Apache scouts serve their own leaders. The weathered hand that accepted the cup was steady, missing 2 fingers' old war wounds. The chief drank deeply, savoring the cold water, then passed the cup to his nearest warrior. Each man drank in turn while Marcus refilled the cups, and something indefinable shifted in the space between them. The ancient hospitality of the desert had been acknowledged. Marcus was no longer simply an enemy or stranger. He was a man who gave water freely. When all had drunk, the chief spoke at length to his daughter. She knelt again and drew more pictures, this time indicating Marcus should draw too. What followed was an exchange of histories. Marcus drew his childhood, a small figure beside a larger one, his mother, then the larger figure lying horizontal death. He drew himself going to war. Many battles. Then the crucial moment, soldiers pointing rifles at fleeing figures that were clearly women and children. He drew himself standing between them, arms outstretched. Then walking away. The chief studied these drawings intently, occasionally asking his daughter questions that she tried to convey through gestures. At one point, she mimed holding a baby, made a shooting motion, then pointed at Marcus with a questioning look. Had he killed Apache children? Marcus shook his head firmly. "Do," he repeated. "Never." He drew a picture of himself throwing down his rifle rather than firing on innocents. Then, on impulse, he went into his cabin and returned with his discharge papers. Though the chief couldn't read English, he recognized official documents. Saw the military seal. Marcus made a gesture of tearing, though he didn't actually damage the papers. Cast out, sent away, disgraced for refusing to kill. The chief stood slowly and walked in a circle around Marcus, examining him from all angles like a horse trader evaluating stock. He paused at Marcus's back, probably noting the way the former soldier still stood at attention despite himself. When he completed the circle, he spoke a single word, "Inda." Marcus knew that word. It meant enemy, specifically white enemy. But the chief's tone wasn't hostile. He touched his own chest and said, "Naiche," his name. Then he touched Marcus's chest and said, "Inda," a question. "Marcus," Marcus responded, touching his own chest. "Marcus Hale." Naiche repeated it several times, getting the pronunciation close enough. Then he returned to the drawings in the dust and added his own. The pictures showed the ranch as a small square, then lines radiating out from it in all directions, paths, perhaps, or connections. He drew figures of different kinds, Apache, soldiers, Mexicans, others all with lines leading to the ranch. In the center, he drew a figure that could have been Marcus. Arms outstretched not in surrender but in welcome. Marcus studied the drawing, beginning to understand. The chief saw something in this moment, in this place, a possibility. The ranch sat on disputed land, belonging to no one and everyone. A neutral ground. Naiche reached into a beautifully beaded pouch at his side and withdrew something wrapped in deer hide. He offered it to Marcus with both hands, a gift requiring reciprocation. Marcus unwrapped it carefully to find a painting on prepared deerskin. The image is done in natural pigments that seemed to glow in the morning light. It showed a mountain with a spring at its base. Animals of all kinds drinking together, deer alongside wolves, rabbits beside hawks, predator and prey sharing water in peace. Marcus understood the weight of this gift, the message within it. He needed to reciprocate with something equally meaningful. He went inside and returned with his mother's Bible, its leather cover worn smooth from handling. He'd read from it every night in the army, seeking comfort or perhaps absolution. He offered it to Naiche with the same formal presentation. The chief accepted it solemnly, running his fingers over the tooled leather, opening it to see the incomprehensible marks that his people knew held power for whites. He nodded approval, not for the religion within, but for the personal value of the exchange. Sacred for sacred. Nazu had been translating something to her father, gesturing toward Marcus and then to her bandages. Naiche walked over to Marcus and placed a hand on his shoulder. He spoke at length in Apache, his tone formal, almost ceremonial. Though Marcus couldn't understand the words, he recognized the cadence of a declaration, perhaps a promise or acknowledgement. When the chief finished, he returned to his horse. But before mounting, he pointed to the sun, then held up 2 fingers, then pointed to the ranch. 2 days. They would return in 2 days. Whether this was a promise or a warning, Marcus couldn't tell. Perhaps both. As the delegation rode away, Nazu lingered for a moment. She said something that sounded like Dante, pointing to her father. When Marcus looked confused, she drew a simple picture in the dust, the chief figure with lines connecting to her figure. Father. She was teaching him words. Dante. Marcus repeated, and she nodded approval before following the others. The warriors on the ridges remained until the chief's party reached them. Then they all withdrew like morning mist burning off in the sun. But Marcus knew they hadn't gone far. He could feel eyes on him as he studied the deer-hide painting, tracing the images of impossible peace at the water's edge. Somewhere out there, Nietzsche was probably examining the Bible with equal intensity. Two men trying to read meaning in each other's sacred objects. The mesquite bean bread Marcus attempted to make that evening was nearly inedible, but he wrapped it in agave fiber twine anyway. If they were coming back in 2 days, he wanted to offer something made with his own hands, even if poorly. The tin cups he cleaned until they shone, and he repaired the handle on his water bucket with fresh leather. That night, he sat studying the painting by lamplight, beginning to understand what Nietzsche had seen in that moment by the well. Not just a man giving water, but a bridge, someone who had lived in both worlds and chosen neither violence nor sides. The ranch could become what the painting showed, a place where different peoples might meet in peace. If only for water. If only for a moment. 2 days. Marcus wondered what they would bring. 2 days had passed as Nietzsche promised, and with the morning came 3 Apache warriors. They appeared at the edge of Marcus's property like ghosts materializing from the desert itself, waiting until he acknowledged them with a raised hand before approaching. These weren't the hardened fighters who had surrounded his ranch. They were younger, perhaps 16 or 17 winters, their eyes bright with curiosity beneath their carefully maintained warrior's composure. They dismounted near the windmill, and Marcus watched their fascination with the mechanical contraption. One reached out tentatively to touch the wooden blades as they turned, jerking his hand back when the mechanism creaked. Marcus couldn't help but smile. He walked over and began demonstrating how the wind turned the blades, which turned the gears, which pumped the water. He used gestures and the few Apache words he'd learned, and when he let one young warrior work the manual pump handle, the boy's face lit up with understanding. 2, the warrior said, grinning as water gushed from the spout. Water. Yes. Marcus nodded. Water from deep in the earth, brought up by wind and ingenuity. They stayed for 2 hours, and when they left, they placed a bundle on his porch pemmican wrapped in corn husks, the dried meat and berries pounded together with fat into a nutritious mass that would keep for months. Food for food, knowledge for knowledge. It was the beginning of something Marcus hadn't expected, education flowing both ways. The next morning brought different visitors. Naju arrived with an elderly man whose face was painted with white clay in patterns Marcus didn't recognize. A medicine man, Marcus realized, noting the elaborate pouch at his belt and the eagle wing fan in his hand. Naju had removed her ceremonial dress for practical clothing, a long skirt and loose blouse that didn't pull at her healing wounds. She moved more easily now, though Marcus noticed she still favored her right side. She spoke to him slowly, teaching him words by pointing. "Easy Nantan," she said, indicating the medicine man. Marcus repeated it until she nodded approval. The old man walked around the well, chanting in a low voice, occasionally sprinkling something from his pouch pollen. Marcus thought, or perhaps cornmeal. He dipped the eagle fan in the water and flicked droplets in the 4 directions, then said something to Naju. "Dajo," she told Marcus, making a gesture that seemed to encompass the well and perhaps the whole ranch. Good. Blessed. Safe. The medicine man had marked this as neutral ground, sacred space where violence was forbidden. Before they left, Naju approached Marcus and pulled something from her bag, a collection of dried plants tied with yucca fiber. She pointed to his left shoulder, where she'd noticed him rubbing it repeatedly. Old wound. Obviously the way soldiers recognize each other's battle damages. She mimed crushing the plants, mixing with water, applying to skin. Then she touched her own bandaged ribs and nodded. These herbs had helped her heal. Marcus accepted the medicine with both hands. The way he'd learned showed respect. "Ahehi," he said, "thank you," one of the first phrases she'd taught him. She smiled, the first time he'd seen her truly smile, and it transformed her face from warrior to woman. just for a moment. Days passed in this manner. Small groups would arrive, usually in the morning. Warriors would examine his tools, his rifle which he taught them to clean and maintain without ever demonstrating how to aim or fire it. He showed them how to repair leather with his awl and heavy thread, how to mend metal with his small forge. They taught him in return which cacti held water, how to read weather in the flight patterns of hawks, where to find the hidden springs that weren't on any army map. One afternoon, a group arrived with children. Marcus heard them before he saw them, high-pitched voices and laughter, sounds that had been absent from his life for years. 3 boys and 2 girls, the youngest perhaps 5 winters, the oldest maybe 10. They hid behind their mother's skirts at first, peering at him with enormous dark eyes. Marcus remembered something from his trunk, a set of lead soldiers his mother had sent him years ago, thinking he might want reminders of military life. He'd never opened them, but now he brought them out, setting them on his porch. The children crept closer, fascinated by the tiny figures. One brave boy reached out to touch one, looking up at Marcus for permission. He nodded, and soon all 5 children were arranging the soldiers in patterns, making them march or dance or fight imaginary battles. The oldest boy suddenly stood at attention and gave Marcus a crisp military salute, something he'd probably seen when soldiers passed through Apache territory. The adults tensed, watching Marcus's reaction. This was a test, perhaps, or just a child's innocent mimicry. Either way, his response mattered. Marcus knelt down to the boy's level and gently took his small hand. "No," he said softly in English, then "do" in Apache. He reshaped the boy's hand into the Apache greeting Naju had taught him, palm out, peaceful, showing no weapon held. "This," Marcus said, demonstrating. "Ya-ate," hello, in the Apache way. The boy repeated the gesture and the word, and Marcus nodded approval. The tension broke. One of the mothers said something that sounded approving, and the children returned to their play. But now the lead soldiers were meeting each other with open hands instead of weapons. That evening, Naju returned alone. Marcus was sitting on his porch trying to repair a bridle by lamplight when she appeared from the darkness, moving so silently he didn't hear her until she spoke. "Tuego," she said, pointing to the eastern sky where stars were beginning to appear. "Night." She sat beside him, not close, but comfortable proximity, and began pointing to the stars, teaching him their Apache names, what he had always called the Big Dipper. She called something that meant the man with legs spread apart. The North Star was the star that does not walk. She told stories with gestures and the growing vocabulary they shared. Tales of first man and first woman, of how Coyote had scattered the stars by opening a blanket too soon. When she pointed to a constellation and made fighting gestures, then touched her chest, Marcus understood. She was explaining her own story. Naju wasn't just a chief's daughter, she was a war leader. When Apache men were killed in raids, the women sometimes took their places, especially if they had the skill and the stomach for it. Her wounds hadn't come from fleeing but from fighting, protecting others as they escaped the scalp hunter's ambush. Marcus found one of his few precious pieces of paper and drew the constellation she'd indicated, then sketched her as he saw her tall, strong, defending smaller figures behind her. She studied his drawing for a long moment, then took the pencil and added something, a small star near the warrior figure. She pointed to it, then to him, then to herself. Connection, alliance, perhaps friendship. Over the following days, the Apache became bolder in their visits. Marcus learned that different groups had different interests. The young warriors wanted to understand mechanical things, his windmill, his forge, the complicated mechanism of his rifle's action. The women were interested in his eastern goods, the iron needles that never broke, the fabric of his one good shirt, the glass bottles he'd saved from medicine and whiskey. One morning, an old woman arrived with what looked like a calendar stick, a saguaro rib carved with symbols marking important events. She showed him how each notch and mark represented something significant: a good harvest, a harsh winter, a battle, a peace treaty. Then she handed him a blank stick and a sharp stone, indicating he should start his own. Marcus made his first mark that day, a simple notch that would remind him of when the teaching began. The medicine man returned, this time bringing juniper ash mixed with bear fat. He showed Marcus how to apply it to old wounds, demonstrating on his own scarred knee. The preparation burned at first, then numbed, then seemed to draw out years of ache Marcus had learned to ignore. In exchange, Marcus showed him his small supply of laudanum and carbolic acid, explaining through gestures their uses. The medicine man was particularly interested in the carbolic's ability to clean wounds, sniffing it carefully and nodding approval. Children began coming regularly, losing their fear as they learned Marcus would let them play with interesting objects and never raised his voice or hand to them. One little girl, perhaps 6 winters old, took to bringing him small gifts: a pretty stone, a feather, a handful of piñon nuts. She would place them on his porch and run away giggling. Marcus would leave something in return: a button, a piece of hard candy from his dwindling supply, a tiny horse he'd carved from soft pine. The young warriors taught him to read tracks he'd never noticed the difference between a doe's print and a young buck's, how to tell if a rabbit was running from predator or toward water. They showed him how to make sotol fiber sandals that were nearly silent on rocky ground, how to find water by watching the flight of doves at dawn. In return, he taught them to repair their Springfield carbines, to make ammunition last longer by proper storage, to maintain leather in the harsh desert climate. One evening, as the sun painted the mountains purple and gold, Naiche himself returned. The chief sat with Marcus on the porch, sharing the bitter coffee Marcus had learned to make stronger, the way the Apache preferred it. Through Naju's translation and their growing mutual vocabulary, Naiche told him something important: the territory was changing. More white settlers were coming. The army was building new forts. The old ways of raid and retreat were ending. The Apache needed to learn new things to survive in this changing world. Marcus understood. Naiche wasn't just allowing these visits, he was encouraging them. His people needed knowledge that Marcus possessed, just as Marcus needed what they could teach him about surviving and thriving in this harsh land. It wasn't friendship. Not yet. But it was something perhaps more valuable: mutual recognition of need and worth. That night, after all had left, Marcus sat studying the stars Naju had named for him. In 2 weeks, his isolated ranch had become a crossing point, a school, a place where 2 worlds touched carefully, tentatively, but with growing trust. He touched the pouch of herbs Naju had given him, felt the absence of pain in his shoulder for the first time in years, and realized something profound: he was healing in ways that had nothing to do with his body. The calendar stick leaned against his wall, that single notch marking the day everything changed. Tomorrow he would add another mark, not for an event, but for a realization. He was no longer alone. He had become part of something larger, something that might, just might, point toward a different future than the bloody one everyone expected. Marcus saw the dust cloud long before he could make out the riders. 8 men moving fast from the direction of Tucson, too fast for friendly travelers. He'd been showing a young Apache boy how to shape horseshoes when the plume appeared on the horizon, and the boy immediately melted away into the desert, running low and quick toward the hidden Apache encampment. Within minutes, Marcus knew. Naiche would know strangers approached. He set down his hammer and watched them come, his stomach tightening with each passing moment. These weren't supply wagons or lost prospectors. The way they rode, spread out in a tactical line, checking flanks, marked them as hunters. And in this territory, there was only one kind of prey that warranted such careful approach. The lead rider became visible first, a big man on a spotted gray horse that looked like it could run for days without tiring. Even at distance, Marcus could see the dark objects hanging from his saddle horn, swaying with the horse's motion. His gut clenched. Scalps. By the time they reached his gate, Marcus had counted the scalps 7, all with the long black hair of Apache warriors. Some still had decorative beads woven in, now clotted with dried blood. The man wearing them like trophies was someone Marcus recognized by reputation, if not by sight: Josiah Creed, bounty hunter out of Tucson. The kind of man who'd found profit in the territory's ongoing conflict, collecting $50 for every Apache scalp from certain towns that didn't ask questions about age or gender. "Well, well," Creed said, reining in his horse just outside the gate. Sergeant Marcus Hale, or should I say, former Sergeant Hale. He was a broad man, face weathered to leather, with pale eyes that never stopped moving. The Colt peacemakers on his hips looked well used, and a Winchester rifle rested across his saddle within easy reach. "It's just Marcus now," Marcus replied, not moving from his position by the forge. "What brings you to my land?" "Creed." "Your land." Creed spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed just inside the gate. "This here's disputed territory, last I checked. No man's land. Or maybe." His eyes glinted with malice. "Apache land. Way you've been carrying on." The 7 men with him spread out along the fence line, hands resting on weapons. Marcus recognized the type border trash who'd shoot a man for his boots if the price was right. One had a necklace of what looked like human teeth. Another wore Apache moccasins, probably taken from a corpse. "I've heard stories about you, Hale," Creed continued. "Man who refused orders. Man who chose Apache lives over his own kind. Thought they were just stories. But then I heard something interesting in Tucson. Heard there's a former sergeant playing school teacher to the heathens out here. Trading with them, helping them." "I trade with anyone who comes in peace," Marcus said evenly. "That's no crime." "No?" Creed reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a rolled paper, yellow and official-looking. He unrolled it with theatrical slowness. "What about harboring fugitives? What about aiding and abetting enemies of the territory of Arizona?" He tossed the paper at Marcus's feet. Marcus picked it up, though he already knew what he'd see. A wanted poster. The kind printed on cheap yellow paper in Tucson print shops. The drawing was crude but recognizable, a tall Apache woman. Warriors bearing unmistakable. "Wanted dead or alive," screamed across the top. "Apache murderous" below. And at the bottom, the number that made men like Creed ride hundreds of miles through desert heat, $500 reward. "They call her Tall Willow," Creed said, watching Marcus's face carefully. "Killed 3 white men up near Globe, they say. Maybe more. Been raiding supply wagons, stealing cattle. $500. Hale. That's more than most men see in 2 years of honest work." Marcus kept his face neutral, though rage boiled in his chest. He knew the truth. Najou had been defending her people from the scalp hunters who'd attacked them. The 3 dead men had been part of the group that had killed Apache children. But truth didn't matter to men like Creed. Only profit mattered. Movement on the ridgeline caught his eye. Najou stood watching, too far to hear but close enough to see everything. The sunlight caught her tall form, dignified even at distance. Other shapes moved among the rock's warriors, ready but waiting. They could see the scalps on Creed's saddle, could see the threat these men represented. "You've seen her," Creed said. It wasn't a question. "The boys in Tucson said she was wounded in a fight 5 weeks back. Said she disappeared into this territory. And here you are, playing friend to every Apache who rides through. You doctored her up, didn't you?" "I've doctored lots of people," Marcus said. "It's Christian charity." Creed laughed, an ugly sound. "Christian charity. That's rich. Coming from you. You know what I heard about you. Hale, I heard you killed 43 Apache in your 5 years with the cavalry. 43 confirmed kills. Some of the boys even remember you said you were death itself with a Springfield rifle. Could shoot the eye out of a hawk at 300 yards. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. 43. He'd never counted, had tried not to remember faces, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. 43 lives ended by his hand, following orders he'd eventually refused to follow anymore. "That was war," Marcus said quietly. "And this ain't." Creed gestured at the landscape. "This is the same war. Hale, same enemy. Only difference is, now there's profit in it. $500 for one Apache woman. Hell, you killed 43 for free. What's one more for good money? Those days are done." "Are they?" Creed leaned forward in his saddle. "Because from where I sit, you're either with us or against us. And if you're protecting that Apache bitch, then you're a traitor to your race, your country, and everything you once fought for." One of Creed's men, A thin fellow with nervous eyes spoke up. "Boss, we got company." Duh. He pointed to the ridgelines where Apache warriors had become visible, perhaps 30 of them, watching. Creed studied them with the eye of a professional killer. "They won't attack. Not while we're talking. Apache honor and all that." He turned back to Marcus. "But here's what's going to happen. We're making camp about a mile from here. Tomorrow at dawn. We're coming for that woman. If she's here, we'll take her. If you try to stop us, we'll go through you. Simple as that. And if she's not here, then we'll find her. These savages can't help themselves, they protect their own. All we have to do is wait and watch. Maybe grab one of those little Apache brats you've been teaching. Children scream real good when you hurt them right. Their mothers come running every time." Marcus's hand wanted to go to the gun he wasn't wearing. His rifle was inside, unloaded, gathering dust. But even if he'd been armed, 8 to 1 weren't odds that favored anything but dying uselessly. "Get off my land," Marcus said. "Not your land, remember?" Creed gathered his reins. "One day. Hale. You've got 1 day to decide where you stand. With civilization or with the savages. Choose wrong. And that discharge paper won't be the only official document with your name on it. There'll be a wanted poster, too. Traitor and Indian lover. Won't be worth $500, but somebody will collect." They rode off toward the west, making camp just as Creed had said, clearly visible from Marcus's porch. He could see them setting up tents, posting guards, professional and patient. They knew their business. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold, Marcus saw the Apache warriors on the ridges growing restless. Some were painting themselves not for ceremony but for war. They'd recognized what those scalps meant, knew these men were the enemy who'd been hunting them for profit. The fragile peace that had been building here was about to shatter. Marcus stood at his gate, watching both camps, the bounty hunters to the west, the Apache to the north and east. He was literally standing between them, on ground that had been marked as neutral, sacred. Tomorrow that wouldn't matter. Tomorrow blood would flow unless. A figure approached from the Apache line as darkness fell. Nazu, moving carefully through the shadows. She stopped just outside his fence, and in the dim light, he could see she understood everything. She'd probably understood from the moment Creed had thrown down that wanted poster. She made a gesture pointing to herself, then away into the desert. She would run. Disappear. Lead them away from here. "No," Marcus said in English. Then, "do," in Apache. He pointed to the ground. "Here. This place." Then he touched his chest, pointed to her, made a protective gesture. He would stand with her. She shook her head, pointed to the bounty hunter's camp, held up 8 fingers, then pointed to him. 1 finger. The math was simple and deadly. But Marcus had already made his choice, had made it the moment he'd seen those scalps, heard Creed talk about torturing children. Some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. He'd refused to kill innocents once, accepting disgrace rather than dishonor. Now he faced the same choice again. But this time it wasn't about what he wouldn't do. It was about what he would do. He went inside and returned with the cavalry sword he hadn't touched in 2 years. He strapped it on, not to fight but to show Nazu something. This was him choosing a side, finally and completely. Not the Apache side or the white side, but the side of justice. The side that said murdering people for profit was wrong, regardless of skin color or language spoken. Nazu studied him for a long moment, then placed her fist over her heart, a warrior's salute to another warrior. She melted back into the darkness, but Marcus knew she'd carry his message to her father. By dawn, everything would change. The only question was whether it would end in blood or something else, something that might preserve the fragile hope that had been growing here. Marcus sat on his porch through the night, watching the fires of both camps, the sword across his lap not as weapon, but as reminder of who he'd been and who he'd chosen to become. Somewhere in the darkness between those fires, the future waited. And for the first time in 2 years, Marcus wasn't running from it. The tallow candle had burned down to a stub, its wavering light casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Marcus sat at his table, the cavalry sword laid out before him. Its belt cracked but still strong after years of neglect. He'd spent the last hour oiling the leather, not because he planned to use the weapon, but because the ritual gave his hands something to do while his mind wrestled with impossibilities. Through the window, he could see the bounty hunters' campfires flickering in the distance, closer, hidden in the darkness. He knew Apache warriors kept their own watch. Between them sat his ranch, 20 acres of disputed land that had become a battlefield without a shot being fired. The daguerreotype of his mother stared at him from the mantel. Margaret Hale, dead 5 winters now. A woman who'd raised him on Bible verses about peace and turning the other cheek. What would she think of her son now, caught between 2 armies, unable to find peaceful resolution to a conflict born of greed and hatred? His fingers found the letter opener on the table, shaped like a cross, another gift from his mother. For opening correspondence, she'd written, and remembering that the word is mightier than the sword. But words meant nothing to men like Creed. They understood only force, profit, and the terrible mathematics of scalp hunting. Memory crashed over him unbidden, as it often did in the deep hours of night. 3 years ago, the Skeleton Canyon Massacre. He'd been with Major Whitman's column when they'd come upon the Apache camp just after dawn. Orders were to eliminate all hostiles. But what they'd found weren't hostiles, they were families. Women cooking morning meals, children playing with corn-husk dolls, old men smoking pipes in the early sun. The attack had begun before Marcus could process what was happening. Soldiers firing into teepees, women screaming, running, falling. And one image burned forever in his mind, a young Apache woman, perhaps 17 winters, reaching for her baby as bullets tore through the camp. She'd almost made it, fingers brushing the infant's wrapping. When a Springfield round took her in the back, she'd fallen forward, her hand landing on the baby's face, as if to shield it even in death. Marcus had stood frozen, rifle unfired, watching the slaughter. When a private near him had turned to vomit, Marcus had felt nothing but a terrible numbness. 43 Apache he'd killed following orders. How many had been reaching for their children? How many had been guilty of nothing more than being born on land white men wanted? That was the day something had broken inside him. 2 months later came the order that ended his military career: fire on fleeing Apache families or face court-martial. He'd chosen court-martial, discharge, disgrace. But at least he could sleep without seeing reaching hands and dying children. A soft scraping at the window pulled him from his reverie. Nazu stood outside, her face barely visible in the candlelight's glow. Marcus opened the window, and she spoke quickly in Apache, words tumbling over each other with urgency. He caught perhaps half of it. Men. Death. Tomorrow. Blood. She knew about the bounty hunters. Of course she did. Every Apache within 50 miles probably knew by now. The scalps on Creed's saddle were a declaration of war, a promise of more death to come. Nazu climbed through the window with her warrior's grace, and for a moment they stood facing each other in the small cabin. 2 people caught in history's terrible machinery. She gestured rapidly, pointing to herself, then to the door, then making a sweeping motion toward the desert. She would run, lead them away, draw them off. "Do," Marcus said firmly. "No." He caught her hands to still them, feeling the calluses from bow and rifle, the strength in those fingers. "Do," he repeated. She pulled free and gestured more emphatically. She pointed to the bounty hunter's camp, held up 8 fingers, then to him, 1 finger. Then she drew her finger across her throat. The message was clear. Stay out of this and live. Interfere and die. Marcus moved to his trunk and pulled out something he'd kept hidden since his mother's death, her wedding ring. Simple gold worn thin from years of work. His father had placed it on her finger 40 years ago, when the frontier was just a dream and the Civil War hadn't yet torn the country apart. Marcus had meant to send it to his sister back east, but had never found the words to accompany it. He took Nazu's hand and placed the ring in her palm, closing her fingers around it. Then he pointed to her, to the ring, and made a gesture toward the Apache camp. "Take this to your father. Let him know I stand with you." The ring of a white woman who believed in peace, given to seal a promise of alliance. Nazu stared at the ring, then at Marcus. Something shifted in her dark eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of the gift's significance. Among her people, such personal items held power, carried the spirit of their owners. This wasn't just metal and memories, it was a binding oath. She spoke again, slower this time, and Marcus understood more. Her father was prepared for war. The young warriors wanted blood for blood, scalp for scalp. They'd lost 7 men to these hunters over the past months, brothers, sons, husbands. The presence of these killers here, on neutral ground, was provocation that couldn't be ignored. Marcus moved to his mantle and took down the one thing he'd thought never to touch again, his service revolver. A .45 caliber Colt that had been his constant companion through 5 years of Indian wars. He opened the cylinder, showing her it was unloaded, then handed it to her grip first. Another message for Naichi. I give up my weapons. I choose another way. Nazu shook her head, tried to hand it back, but Marcus pressed it into her hands along with the ring. He then moved to the cavalry sword, still lying on the table. This he strapped on, the weight strange after so long, but he wasn't wearing it as a weapon. He touched the sword, then his heart, then made a gesture of pushing away. A warrior's tool, but not for war, for standing witness, for showing courage without killing. Through gestures and their limited shared vocabulary. Marcus tried to explain his plan. At dawn, he would stand between the two forces, not to fight, but to be a bridge. If blood must flow, let it flow over him first. Perhaps his death, a white man dying to protect Apache, might shock both sides into seeing the madness of this cycle. Nazu's eyes widened with understanding, then narrowed with something like anger. She grabbed his shoulders, shook him slightly, spoke rapid Apache that needed no translation. "Don't be a fool. Don't throw your life away. Don't make me watch you die." The last part was in her eyes more than her words, something personal that transcended the politics of race and territory. Over these weeks of teaching and learning, of sharing knowledge and stories under the stars, something had grown between them. Not love. Perhaps that was too simple a word for something forged in such complexity. But connection, recognition. 2 warriors who'd chosen to stop being weapons. Marcus touched her face gently, feeling the warmth of her skin, the strength in her jaw. "Niha," he said, one of the words she'd taught him. Together. If dawn brought death, they'd face it together. If it brought something else, some slim chance for peace, they'd build that together too. She leaned into his touch for just a moment, then pulled away. All business again, the warrior reasserting herself over the woman. She moved to the window, then turned back. From her belt, she pulled something wrapped in deer hide, a small medicine bundle. She placed it on his table, spoke a single word, "Gauche." Protection. Then she was gone, melting into the darkness like smoke. Marcus heard her horse moving away. She'd take his messages to Naichi, the ring and the gun that meant more than any words he could have spoken. He sat back down at his table, the medicine bundle warm under his fingers. Inside, he could feel small objects, stones, perhaps, or bones, items of power blessed by the medicine man. Protection for the battle ahead, though not the kind of battle anyone expected. The candle finally guttered out, leaving him in darkness. Through the window, he could see the first pale hint of dawn touching the eastern mountains. In an hour, maybe less, Creed and his men would come. The Apache would be watching, and Marcus would stand between them with nothing but an empty sword and the desperate hope that sometimes, just sometimes, Courage without violence could stop violence itself. He thought again of that Apache woman reaching for her baby, of all the reaching hands and all the battles he'd fought. Tomorrow, today. Now he would reach too. Not for a weapon or for safety, but for something harder, the possibility of peace in a land that had forgotten its meaning. His mother's Bible lay open where he'd left it. Turned to Isaiah. They shall beat their swords into plowshares. Marcus touched the cavalry sword at his side. Not a plowshare yet, but no longer a weapon either. Something in between, something new. The eastern sky grew lighter. Somewhere out there, Naju was delivering his message. Somewhere, Naiche was making his own hard choice. And somewhere, Creed was preparing for what he thought would be an easy kill. Marcus stood, checked the sword belt one last time, and stepped onto his porch to wait for dawn and whatever redemption or damnation it might bring. Dawn came slowly to the desert, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Marcus stood in the space between his porch and his gate, the wooden bucket from his ammunition box days hanging from his left hand, fresh water sloshing gently inside. His right hand rested on the cavalry sword's pommel, not gripping, just touching. A reminder of what he'd chosen to be and what he'd chosen not to be. The bounty hunters approached in a loose line, Creed at the center, his men spread out to cover angles of fire. They moved like professionals, checking the ridge lines where Apache warriors had become visible in the growing light. Marcus counted them again, 8 men armed with repeating rifles and revolvers, enough firepower to kill dozens before anyone could close to fighting distance. They stopped 20 feet from where Marcus stood. Creed leaned forward in his saddle, tobacco juice staining his gray beard. "Well, Sergeant Hale, you've made your choice. I see. Wearing that sword like you mean to use it." "The sword stays sheathed," Marcus said, his voice carried in the still morning air. "I'm not here to fight." "Then move aside. We've got business with that Apache bitch, and you're in the way." Movement on the northern ridge drew everyone's attention. Naiche was descending, and beside him rode Naju. They came slowly, deliberately, showing they weren't attacking but weren't retreating either. Behind them, visible but holding position, at least 50 warriors watched with arrows nocked and rifles ready. "Chief," Creed said with mock politeness as Naiche stopped his horse 10 feet from Marcus. "Come to bargain for your murdering daughter, I'll make it simple, $500, dead or alive. I prefer dead." "Easier to transport." Naiche said something in Apache to his daughter, who translated in careful English she'd been learning more than Marcus had realized. "My father says you wear death on your saddle. Those men you killed were hunters bringing meat to families. Now children cry with empty bellies. Should have thought of that before they crossed into white territory," Creed replied. "This is how the world works, Princess. Your kind kills ours. We kill yours. Circle of life, you might say." Marcus stepped forward, lifting the water bucket. "This is how it started," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Water. I gave her water when she was wounded. That's all. One human being helping another." He looked directly at Creed. "This is what started everything, a drink of water. You want blood. Start with mine. But first..." He extended the bucket toward Creed. "Drink." Creed stared at him like he'd lost his mind. What kind of trick is this? No trick. Custom. In the desert, sharing water means acknowledging the other as human, as deserving of life. Marcus kept the bucket extended. "You're human, Creed. Twisted by greed, maybe, but human. So drink. I don't need your charity or your sermons, traitor." "Then you'll die of thirst," Marcus said simply. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, we all need water. We all need each other. That's what I've learned here." One of Creed's men, the nervous one from yesterday, spoke up. "Boss, riders coming. From the south." Everyone turned to look. A dust cloud approaching fast, at least a dozen riders. As they got closer, Marcus saw the glint of a badge, recognized the straight-backed riding style of military men turned lawkeepers. Marshal Tom Brennan from Tucson. And he'd brought a posse. "Someone reported a war band gathering," Brennan called out as he reined in his horse. His eyes took in the scene, the bounty hunters, the Apache on the ridges, Marcus standing between them with a water bucket. "Marcus, Marcus, hail Christ Almighty. Is that you?" "Hello, Tom," Marcus said. They'd served together at Fort Grant before Brennan had mustered out to become a lawman. More importantly, Marcus had saved his life during an Apache ambush in '79, carrying him 2 miles with an arrow in his shoulder. "What the hell is happening here?" Brennan asked, though his eyes were already calculating, reading the situation like the veteran he was. "These men," Marcus said, pointing to Creed's group, "came here to murder a woman for bounty money. They're planning to torture children to draw out their parents. They told me so yesterday." "That's a lie," Creed snarled. "We're operating under legal bounty notices. This woman," he pointed at Naju, "is wanted for murder. $500 reward, dead or alive." "She's also the person who saved the Garrison family last winter," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly. 3 settler children lost in a blizzard near Globe. She found them, built them a shelter, stayed with them until the storm passed, delivered them home safe. Beth Garrison would be dead if not for her. Little Thomas, too. You can verify that with the family. Brennan's expression shifted. He knew the Garrisons, good Mormon family that had moved to the territory 3 years back. "That true?" he asked Naju directly. She nodded, then spoke carefully in English. "Children are children. Apache. White no difference when cold and scared. She's still wanted for killing 3 white men," Creed insisted. "The men who murdered her hunting party," Marcus said, "including 2 boys barely old enough to hold rifles. She was defending her people from scalp hunters." He gestured to the scalps on Creed's saddle. "Men like you." Brennan studied the scalps, his face hardening. "Scalp hunting's been outlawed in the territory for 2 months now. Creed, new directive from Washington. Where'd you take these trophies?" "Mexico," Creed said quickly. "Took them in Mexico." "Funny thing," Brennan said. "Those look pretty fresh for a Mexico run. And I recognize that beadwork. That's Chiricahua pattern. Local Apache. Not Mexican." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Creed's hand moved toward his gun. Apache bows drew tighter. Marcus felt rather than saw Naju tense beside him. One wrong move and the morning would explode in blood. Marcus did the only thing he could think of. He set down the water bucket, unbuckled his gun belt, the one he'd put on that morning out of habit, and let it drop to the ground. "I'm done with killing," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. 5 years I served. 43 Apache I killed following orders. 43 souls on my conscience. No more." He turned to Creed. "You want to kill her. Kill me first. Unarmed. In front of the marshal and God and everyone. Show us all what you really are." "Josiah." Creed's face went red, then purple. His hand wrapped around his peacemaker's grip. "You think I won't? You think I care about one traitor's life?" "I think," Brennan said quietly, his own hand resting on his weapon, "that if you draw that gun, you'll hang for murder. My posse and I will see to that personally. You're taking his side, the Indian lover's side. I'm taking the law's side," Brennan said. "And the law says no more scalp hunting. The law says no murdering unarmed men. The law says this stops now." Naichi spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of decades of leadership. Naju translated, "My father says the water is good here, clean, life-giving, worth protecting. He offers safe passage to all who come in peace, but those who bring death." She paused, making sure everyone understood. "The desert has many bones. Room for more?" It wasn't a threat exactly, more like a statement of fact. The desert was vast, and men who went into it looking for violence often never came out. Creed looked around at his men, uncertain now, at the marshal and his posse, hands on weapons, at the Apache warriors on the ridges, ready to rain death if needed, at Marcus, standing defenseless but somehow stronger for it. "This isn't over," Creed said finally. "You can't protect her forever. Hail!" "I don't need to," Marcus replied. He picked up the water bucket again, offered it once more. "She can protect herself. I'm just trying to protect all of us from becoming what we hate." For a long moment, Creed stared at the offered water. Then he spat, wheeled his horse around, and rode away. His men followed, looking relieved to avoid a fight they weren't sure they could win. Brennan watched them go, then turned to Marcus. "You know you've made an enemy there." "I've made a lot of things," Marcus said, finally setting down the bucket. "Enemies, friends." He glanced at Najou. "Choices I can live with." "The warrant on her still stands," Brennan said quietly. "I can't make that disappear." "But you won't enforce it," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Brennan looked at Najou, at Naichi, at the warriors on the ridges, then at Marcus, the man who'd saved his life once. "I didn't see anyone here matching that description," he said finally. "Just a bunch of folks sharing water on neutral ground. Nothing illegal about that." He gathered his reins. "Marcus, word of advice. The territory's changing. Railroads coming through. Armies building more forts. This—" He gestured at the Apache camp, the ranch, the space between worlds. "This won't last forever." "Nothing does," Marcus agreed. "But maybe it'll last long enough." "Long enough for what?" Marcus looked at Najou, who was translating for her father. Naiche nodded slowly, understanding what had just happened, what had been prevented. "Long enough to prove there's another way, that we don't have to keep killing each other. That water can mean more than blood." Brennan studied him for a moment, then touched the brim of his hat. "You always were an idealist, Marcus. Just be careful. Idealists die young out here." "So do realists," Marcus replied. "At least idealists die hoping." The marshal and his posse rode off, following the bounty hunters at a distance to make sure they kept going. As the dust settled, Marcus found himself standing between Naichi and Najou, the water bucket at his feet, the morning sun warming his face. Naiche spoke at length, and Najou translated. "My father says you stood with empty hands against armed men. This is true courage. He says the ranch is now blood ground not from killing, but from the choice not to kill. Sacred in a different way." The chief reached into his pouch and withdrew something Marcus's mother's ring, the one he'd sent with Najou. Naiche placed it in Marcus's palm, then covered it with his own weathered hand. He spoke a single word that needed no translation: Shima, mother. He understood what the ring meant, what Marcus had offered. Then Naichi did something unexpected. He dismounted, walked to the bucket, and drank deeply. His daughter followed. Then Marcus. 3 people, 3 worlds, sharing water in the desert while warriors in the rising sun bore witness. "Da Zhou," Naichi said. "Good." Marcus nodded. Not perfect, not solved, not peaceful, but good. For now, for this moment, for this small space in the vast desert. Good was enough. The Apache began withdrawing back to their camp, but Najou lingered. She touched the place where her wound had been, now healed to a scar. "You gave me water," she said in careful English. "Today you gave us all water." "It's what people do," Marcus said simply, "when they remember their people." She smiled, that rare, transformative expression that turned warrior to woman. "Some people," she corrected. "Some rare people." As she rode away, Marcus picked up his gun belt and water bucket, carrying both back to his cabin. The sword at his side had never left its sheath, but it had served its purpose, showing he was willing to be a warrior for peace. The crisis had passed, but Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Word would spread about what had happened here. Some would call him traitor, Others might call him something else. But on his calendar stick that night, he would carve a new notch not for violence prevented, but for the moment when water proved stronger than blood. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Creed, and Marshal Brennan had returned, this time with papers from the territorial government and a proposition. He sat at Marcus's table, studying the deer-hide painting Nietzsche had given Marcus, while outside, Apache children played with settler children in the shade of the cottonwood. "The governor's interested in what you've built here," Brennan said, accepting the coffee Marcus offered. "Words reach Tucson about this place, a ranch where Apache and settlers meet without bloodshed. Some think you're crazy. Others think you might be onto something. What do you think, Tom?" "I think desperate times make folks willing to try desperate measures." Brennan pulled out a leather portfolio. "The territory needs water agreements. The Apache need guaranteed access without getting shot. The settlers need to know they won't be raided. You've somehow become the one man both sides trust." Marcus looked through the window where Naju was teaching the garrison children Apache words while their mother, Beth, watched nervously but determinedly from the porch. After Marcus had revealed how Naju had saved Beth's children, the woman had arrived unannounced yesterday with a basket of preserves and stammered thanks. "What exactly is the governor proposing?" Marcus asked. "Official designation. This ranch becomes a water station. Neutral territory under territorial protection. Apache get guaranteed access. Settlers too. You manage it, keep the peace. Government pays you a stipend." "And Naju, the warrant." Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Can't make it disappear. But if she's officially designated as a translator and cultural liaison for the water station, she'd have certain protections. Government employees can't be bounty hunted." It was more than Marcus had dared hope for. "I need to discuss this with Nietzsche." "Expected as much. I'll wait." Marcus found Nietzsche near the well, watching his grandchildren, for that's what the Apache children had become to him, play with the lead soldiers Marcus had given them. The chief's English had improved remarkably in the past weeks, though he still preferred speaking through his daughter. "Government wants make paper," Marcus said in his broken Apache, then switched to English, letting Naju translate the complex parts. He explained Brennan's offer, the protections it would provide, the obligations it would create. Nietzsche listened in silence, then spoke at length to his daughter. She turned to Marcus. "My father says paper is white man's magic, sometimes good, sometimes trap, but he sees you speak truth. He asks, 'What does your heart say?'" Marcus considered. "My heart says we've started something worth protecting. Apache and settlers learning each other's ways. Children playing together. This could be the beginning of real peace. Or end of Apache ways," Nietzsche said in his careful English. "When people meet, one way often dies." "Not dies," Marcus replied. "Changes. Both ways change. Become something new." Nietzsche stood and placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You are good man. Marcus Hale. We trust." When they returned to the cabin, Brennan had been joined by others. 2 Apache subchiefs Marcus had come to know, 3 settlers, including Beth Garrison and, surprisingly, the territorial judge, Howard Prescott, a gray-bearded man known for fair dealing. "Heard I was needed to witness something historical," Prescott said, "though I admit I never expected to see Apache and settlers negotiating water rights without gunfire. What followed was perhaps the strangest treaty negotiation in territorial history." Naju translated for her father and the subchiefs. Marcus found himself translating for both sides, using his growing Apache vocabulary and gestures when words failed. Beth Garrison spoke for the settlers, her voice growing stronger as she talked about her children playing safely with Apache children, learning that the savages they'd been taught to fear were people with the same hopes and fears. The terms were simple but revolutionary. The ranch would serve as an official water station, neutral ground where no weapons could be drawn in anger. Apache would have guaranteed access to water and could trade freely. Settlers would have the same rights. Marcus would manage the station with Naju as official translator. The Apache would help protect the station from raiders, while the territorial government would protect it from bounty hunters and military interference. This won't be popular with everyone, Judge Prescott warned as he drafted the official documents. There are those who profit from conflict. There are those who profit from peace, too, Marcus replied. They just haven't been given the chance yet. As the judge wrote, Naju approached Marcus privately. In her hands, she carried something wrapped in white doeskin. My father wishes to make you family, she said quietly. But there is something else first. She unwrapped the object, a traditional Apache wedding basket, woven with willow and decorated with symbols Marcus was only beginning to understand. The pattern told a story, two paths converging, becoming one, leading to water. Among my people, woman chooses, she said, meeting his eyes directly. I choose you, Marcus Hale, if you will have me. Marcus felt his breath catch. Over the weeks, he'd tried not to acknowledge what was growing between them, telling himself it was too complicated, too dangerous. But standing here, seeing the courage it took for her to bridge this gap between worlds, he knew his answer. Yes, he said simply. Awo, in Apache, yes. She smiled, that transformation that never failed to move him. There will be ceremony, both kinds. If you wish, Apache and white. Both, Marcus agreed. We are both. When they returned to the group, Naichi stood. He spoke formally in Apache, and Naju translated, her voice carrying new meaning for Marcus now. My father says the papers are good, but paper can burn, tear, be lost. Apache way is different. Apache way is adoption, family, blood ties that cannot be broken. The chief withdrew an eagle feather from his pouch, one marked with red ochre and sacred to his clan. He approached Marcus and began speaking in Apache, his voice taking on the cadence of ceremony. The other Apache present stood, witnesses to something sacred. Naichi placed the feather in Marcus's hair, securing it with a leather tie. He spoke words that Naju translated with tears in her eyes. You are no longer white man alone. You are Apache too. My son, her husband, bridge between worlds. Where you go, Apache protection follows. What you build, we help build. Your enemies become our enemies. Your family, our family. Judge Prescott watched with fascination. I'll need to record this somehow. First official adoption ceremony I've witnessed. Record this too, Beth Garrison said suddenly. She stepped forward and took Marcus's hand. Mr. Hale saved my children through the woman he protected. The Garrison family stands with him. Other settlers will too, once they know the truth. One by one, the others present spoke their support. The Apache sub-chiefs pledged warriors to protect the water station. The settlers pledged to spread word that peace was possible. Brennan pledged to enforce the neutral ground laws. As afternoon gave way to evening, the formal documents were signed. Marcus signed his name, then watched as Naichi made his mark not an X, but a symbol representing water and mountains. Naju signed both her Apache name and Tall Willow in English. This calls for whiskey, Judge Prescott declared, but Naichi held up his hand. First, Apache way, he said in English. From his pouch, he withdrew corn pollen and began a blessing ceremony. He spoke words over the water, the papers, the people gathered. Marcus understood only fragments, but the meaning was clear. This was sacred now, protected by powers older than governments or armies. That evening, as the witnesses departed to spread news of the agreement, Marcus found himself alone with Naju by the well. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple. Are you certain? He asked her. Your life will become even more complicated. Some Apache will say you've betrayed tradition. Some whites will never accept you. I have been between worlds since birth, she replied. Warrior in woman's body. Apache who speaks English, fighter who chooses peace. Now I choose to be between worlds with someone who understands. Marcus pulled out the letter from his sister that had sat unopened for months. With Naju beside him, he finally broke the seal. The letter was full of Eastern concerns, society gossip, fashion changes, worry about his exile to the wilderness. At the bottom, a plea. Come home, Marcus. There's nothing for you in that wasteland. He walked to his desk and began writing his response. Dear Margaret, the wasteland has become an oasis. I've found my purpose here. And more, I've found family. Not the family of blood, but the family of choice and circumstance. I'm to be married to a remarkable woman who has taught me that courage isn't about weapons, but about building bridges. We're creating something new here, something that might serve as a model for peace between peoples who have been at war for generations. I know you won't understand. The Marcus you knew, the soldier who left Boston, no longer exists. In his place stands someone harder to define, not white or Apache, but both. Not soldier or civilian, but peacekeeper. Not alone, but part of something larger. We're planning a harvest celebration for the autumn. Apache and settlers together, sharing food, sharing stories. I'm teaching children, all children, to read and write. My wife-to-be is teaching them to survive and thrive in this hard land. Together. We're teaching them that different doesn't mean enemy. I won't be coming home, Margaret, because I am home. But you're welcome here if you ever wish to see what your brother has become. Your loving brother, Marcus. As he sealed the letter, Najou placed her hand over his. No regrets. None, Marcus said. For the first time in my life, none. Outside, they could hear preparations beginning for what would become a new tradition, the weekly gathering where Apache and settlers would share food and water, trade goods and stories. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else had drums. The music that resulted was neither Apache nor American, but something uniquely of this place, this moment. The calendar stick leaned against the wall, its notches telling the story of transformation. Marcus added another mark. This one different from the others, a circle intersected by two lines. The symbol Najou had taught him meant paths joining. Within months, word would spread throughout the territory about the water station where former enemies met in peace. The army would send observers, trying to understand how a disgraced sergeant had accomplished what generals couldn't. Other ranches would attempt similar arrangements, some succeeding, many failing. But here, at this small ranch on disputed land, the impossible continued daily. Marcus stood with Najou on the porch, watching Apache and settler children chase fireflies together in the gathering darkness. The lead soldiers had been put away, replaced by toys the children made together, dolls from corn husks and clay, horses from twisted grass, dreams from shared imagination. Your mother's ring, Najou said suddenly. I should return it for the wedding. Keep it, Marcus said. It's already served its purpose. It brought us here. She leaned against him, warrior and woman, Apache and soon-to-be wife, contradiction and completion. What do you think happens next? I don't know, Marcus admitted. Railroads coming, armies building forts, things will change. Things always change. But this, she gestured to the children playing, the adults talking, the peace growing fragile, but real. This we protect, this we grow. As stars began appearing in the desert sky, the same stars she'd taught him to see differently. Marcus felt the weight of the eagle feather in his hair and the responsibility it represented. He was no longer just Marcus Hale, failed soldier. He was the bridge, the translator, the keeper of neutral ground. He was proof that people could change, that enemies could become family, that water could indeed be stronger than blood. The harvest celebration would come with the autumn moon. Apache and settlers would dance together for the first time in the territory's history. There would be corn and venison, Apache bread and apple pie, languages mixing and children laughing. There would be challenges. Creed wasn't done. The army would interfere. Traditions would clash. But tonight, in this moment, hope flowered in the desert like the rare blooms that followed rain. Marcus had started with empty hands and a bitter heart. Now his hands were full of work, of purpose, of the woman beside him, And his heart had found what it hadn't known. It was seeking redemption, not through forgetting the past, but through building a different future. The water still flowed from the well, clear and cold and life-giving. And around it, drop by drop, peace grew.